Hi, welcome to the Property Podcast. I'm Rob B, and with me, of course, is Rob D. And this week, we've got a really special episode with some special guests. We look at tenants and taxes with some interviews from the Property Investor Show.
So this week, Rob, we get to revisit and relive some of our weekend at the Property Investor Show. What a weekend that was. Great for so many reasons. But one of those reasons was that it gave us a chance to speak to experts from other areas of property, get their insights on various different things that we wouldn't otherwise be exposed to. So we're playing out a couple of those today, and we've got more to come. But one of the other big highlights of the Investor Show, before we get into that, was meeting lots of lovely people. And yesterday, as we're recording this, was the first Thursday of the month, which means it was Meetup Day. I didn't get to go because I was in Spain, but you went and met lots of lovely people, I believe.
I did. I went to London North. It was lovely. Nice sunny afternoon, evening in London. 40 plus people there, which is great. I really enjoyed it. Nice to see lots of familiar faces, but also some new ones as well. And I look forward to getting to another one next month. But they're so good. So many people are friendly. And there were some new people there, and they just were surprised at how warm and open everybody was. You know, there was no agenda. Everyone was just laid back. I say this every time, but it's because I enjoy it every time. And then, if my day couldn't get any better, I left and then went to watch Liverpool in a semi-final, get to a final. So, might have to do a podcast from Basel soon, Rob.
Yeah, I thought you were sounding a bit chirpy this morning. Congratulations. But yeah, the meetups are always fantastic. They're really mushrooming as well. There's new ones every single month. And funny enough, I got an email just the other day from someone who was saying how he'd been on one of these courses, one of those things where you go along to some free course and they try to upsell you at another course and all the rest of it. And it really put him off the whole experience, and he was kind of disturbed by the whole thing. So I said to him, get yourself along to a meetup. If you want to get re-excited about property and realise that not everyone's some kind of horrible money-grabbing shark, get yourself along there. It doesn't cost anything, and hopefully it will give you some useful support and confidence in the whole thing. So I hope he does, and I hope if you haven't been along to a meetup, you will do soon. Next month's meetups are already available to book if you go to thepropertyhub.net/meetups.
Okay, so time to look at our news story. And we mentioned a few weeks ago this was on the cards, but some of the mortgage companies have taken the first step. What are we talking about? Well, we're talking about it's the ratio of rent required against the property you're borrowing. Sounds confusing. It sounds, but actually it's quite simple. Basically, whatever your rent is, at the moment, most banks' lenders want to see 125% coverage. So, for example, if your mortgage payment would be £400, then the banks want to see your rent at £500. Makes sense? So whatever your mortgage is, you need 125% rent. It sounds a lot, but actually, because the rates are so low, it's very easy to achieve. Well, certainly in the North and the Midlands, a little bit more difficult in London. However, some of the banks and building societies know that the pressure is coming from the government, from the Bank of England, to start moving up these ratios, and some have already taken action, Rob, and it's now 145.
Yeah, so check my maths here, because this is not my strong suit, but I think, to take your example, if you've got a mortgage payment of £400, at 1.45, your rental income would now need to be £580 instead of £500. You want to check that out, yeah?
No, that's
okay,
right.
Good.
That's right. Absolutely. So that don't doubt yourself.
So that's the effect. And yeah, it's something that we knew would be coming, and Nationwide has made the first move, and that is significant because they own the Mortgage Works, which is generally one of the more permissive lenders in terms of their criteria. So if you're, for example, not an experienced investor, or you don't have a lot of personal income, the Mortgage Works is often one that will take you where others might not. And they are a major lender. And so the article, which we've taken from the Telegraph, suggests that other lenders are expected to follow suit. How much of a big deal is this? Well, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because it's obviously not great news that things are getting harder, but as you alluded to, Rob, it's the cover that was required before wasn't extreme. When you consider all the other costs, like I've never had a property where I've come anywhere near struggling on that requirement, and I don't think it's really going to make any difference with the fact that it's being raised. It will, of course, have an effect with properties that don't yield particularly well, especially in the southeast, and one suspects that that's the entire point.
It is, but While some people could see this as a negative thing, I actually think it's a positive because it's going to protect a lot of amateurs. In the north, as you say, Rob, cash flows are strong, so this won't affect anyone because the coverage is more than there. But if somebody is buying in the north and they don't meet this coverage ratio, then they're probably not buying well, so it'll protect them. But equally, people who are just buying in London because that's all they know, it might make them consider looking elsewhere. And I think we've mentioned once or twice, we think there possibly is opportunities elsewhere right now. Actually, on this point, people asked me at the meetup, because it was at a London meetup and there were property investors from London there. They said, you're bashing London, you two, all the time. Is that it? You'll never go back there? And far from it. London is an absolutely brilliant investment for the long term. However, there's just clearly better value elsewhere. We both, I'm sure, will invest in London again in the future. I will source property again in London in the future, just not now, especially with measures like this coming in. But hopefully they'll have the right effect and soften the market, so then the value does come back. But we'll see.
Yeah, we will. And on a similar kind of theme, there's a really interesting thread. Well, I think it's interesting because it's about me. An interesting thread in the Property Hub at the moment, linking to a blog post that I wrote about whether I should sell one of my London investments for this exact reason. It's, on the one hand, it's a great investment for the long term. On the other, I could go and get a better return if I take my gain that I've made and put it elsewhere in the country right now. So which should I do? And there's a poll on that topic as well. So we'll link to that thread in the show notes so you can weigh in on that one and let us know what you think. And we'll also link to the news story from the Telegraph that explains the nationwide changes in more detail. Both of those you'll find in the show notes at thepropertyhub.net/tenants and taxes. And the reason we're calling it Tenants and Taxes is because those are the two topics that we're talking about this week with our guests who we spoke to at the Property Investor Show.
We did. We had we had more than two guests, but we got two guests on this episode. And often in property, particularly at the Property Investor Show, understandably, there's lots of positivity. People are talking about, their investments, what they want to do in the future. Some people go to the shows looking for investments, whatever floats your boat. But the point is, everyone who goes there is there because they feel positive about property, generally. However, there are challenges in property, and we like to highlight them, and we do regularly. However, it's clearly that the two common problems that people have right now, one is an old one, tenants. People are just worried about tenants. What if they get a bad one? What if they don't pay your rent? What if I can't find a tenant? So tenants issues are historically something that landlords investors always talk about. And a new one that never really was an issue before, but has become an issue because of the government's intervention, is taxes. So many people ask us about taxes now. It hasn't stopped. Even though we've done multiple podcasts and a course on the Property Hub, we still get asked all the time about taxes. So we were fortunate enough to meet two experts at the Property Investor Show who could help us out to understand these issues a little bit more, and hopefully yourselves as well.
So the first interview we're going to play is with Paul Shamplina, a man who seems to be as busy as we are. He's all over the place. He's got a TV series on Channel 5 Wednesdays at 10 o'clock called Nightmare Tenants, Slum Landlords. And he has a radio show called The Property Hour with Clive Bull on LBC every Thursday at 9 o'clock. He's also the founder of Landlord Action, who help out landlords and letting agents with evictions. He's all over the place. He's been doing this a long time. He really knows what he's talking about. So a busy man with lots and lots of experience in this field. We started out by asking Paul how he got started.
When I started the company 16 years ago, my background was legal. I worked in a couple of law firms. I started helping landlords in 1990. That's why I got so many grey hairs. In 1999, I met my previous partner, Landlord Action, who I helped evict 22 illegal immigrants in a 3-bed house in North London. And I did it for fixed fees, and out of that we started Landlord Action. So since we started in 1999, we've dealt with over 35,000 instructions. So we run about 400 to 450 cases, dealing with rent arrears, possession cases. And 3 years ago, we became a firm of solicitors, so we became regulated. So I have a team of solicitors and paralegals, and we are helping distressed landlords. Most landlords will never have to go to court, but last year alone there was 147,000 possession claims issued in England and Wales. And last year also was a record high amount of accelerator Section 21 cases of 37,000.
It's fantastic that your service exists, but obviously nobody really wants to use your service. So what can investors do to make sure that they don't even have to use companies like yours? Because there must be steps that you think every investor should be taking to try and at least minimise their risk of things going wrong.
Well, firstly, we're like the landlord Samaritans, all right? So we have an advice line, we help landlords. Yeah, people don't, we're like emergency plumbers. People use us as and when they need us. So obviously I do loads of talks on how to avoid a bad tenant. I've done one just before. No landlord wants two bad things for a landlord. Is rent arrears and void periods. That can make or break a landlord. So I would always say for a landlord, and most amateur landlords out there, I mean the majority of landlords out there, 78% of landlords own one property. They don't see themselves as landlords and they don't put a value on their time. I would always say use a letting agent, a regulated agent, and actually pay the extra and do full management, because landlords, they don't understand the rule changes. The Deregulation Act came in the 1st of October last year. Right to rent came in the 1st of Feb this year. We still get 3 to 5 calls a day on our advice line of landlords that haven't even heard the deposit scheme and only came in April 2007. So it's a big problem. So referencing is really important. You can't just go on gut feeling alone. Obviously using a regulated agent. Don't be rash with the referencing. Don't think I've got to pay the mortgage payment at the end of this month. Go on gut feeling, but obviously gut feeling's got to be backed up with all the initial referencing stuff. So 3 months bank statements, previous landlord's reference, employer's reference, and of course get a rent guarantee policy, which makes sense. It's worth its weight in gold.
If things do start to go wrong, the legal process, obviously, even if everything goes perfectly, takes a certain amount of time. It takes longer than we'd like, but often it can end up taking longer than it needs to because landlords make mistakes in how they do it.
Correct.
What are the most common mistakes that you see that are avoidable?
The most common mistakes that we see at Landlord Action when we end up taking over cases is that they've served the notices wrong, they put the wrong information, they haven't put the deposit in the deposit scheme, disrepair issues, and they've been harassing the tenant. Okay? Because landlords get a disease when they have a problem tenant called landlord rage. Right, and they're feeling it, and they act very emotive, and they act on their emotions. So, I would say that no landlord wants to get a problem tenant. You have to be professional. You have to present yourself as being professional. A lot of tenants, if they do fall on hard times, they lose their job. You make sure you hold their hand so they can apply for a housing benefit. But a month and a day is 2 months' rent. So that's when you should be serving your Section 8 notice. In between, you should be trying to collect the money, but not harass the tenant. Don't turn up 10 o'clock at night banging on the door.
You mentioned about getting your property managed, but some people self-manage and they build relationships with their tenants, and they find it hard to do what you said, to maybe push the boat and feel uncomfortable about asking for rent to be paid on time and let things slip. Is there any advice you can give people who've maybe gone a bit too far down that road and how they can amend their ways? Yeah,
I mean, that's a very valid point, actually. I think a lot of landlords don't treat it as a business. Even they've got 1 property, 2 properties they want to give up. A lot of landlords have been clobbered recently with the taxes and whatever. Landlords don't know what's going to go on, Brexit and all that information. Landlords need to be professional at all times. Keep a distance, don't be over familiar with the tenant. Always give your tenant a chance. Communication is key, but sometimes tenants bury their head in the sand. Dare I say it, on the TV programme that I've just done, we've got a landlord that's owed 3 years rent arrears. Not 3 months, 3 years. Crazy. Got involved with the tenant, loads and loads of problems. But I mean, how can you survive 3 years? You've got to pay a mortgage. So give the tenant a chance, try and work with them. Everyone falls on hard times. Having a tenant is about longevity. The longer the tenant's in there, the better. Not in for renewal fees, not in for refurbished fees. I mean, I spoke to a landlord the other day, he's had a tenant for 11 years. Keep the rent a little bit below market value, makes sense. I do that with my tenants. It is about relationships, but it's also a landlord and tenant relationship, not best mate relationships.
Do you think it's getting more challenging for landlords to remove problem tenants? There seems to be more legislation coming in all the time. Section 21, there are now more prerequisites in order to successfully serve it. Do you think it's getting more difficult?
Well, it is getting more difficult, and I was involved in the Deregulation Act that came in. I helped draft, with Landlord Action, we helped draft the Section 21 notice that's come in. We made it easier. Now there's a whole load of stuff that a landlord's got to serve prior. The biggest problem is landlords don't educate themselves, they don't know, and they don't have the time, and of course it ends up biting them on the backside when it does go wrong. Going to court can take 3 to 4 or 5 months. If a tenant wants to stay there as long as possible, they can sit it out for 4 or 5 months. And the hardest thing is for a landlord is they're not up to date with the information of what their tenant's financial circumstances are. And when they want to try and collect the money, it's harder. Most tenants don't have any assets, that's why they're renting. So going to court, there's a lot of court closures now. Bailiffs are being cut. There's challenges. I mean, I have someone full-time working at Landlord Action just calling up the courts, trying to get through to the courts. It's a nightmare. It's hard. We have to manage the landlord's expectations. And more importantly, how can the landlord pay the mortgage for 4 or 5 months? We always tell them worst case scenario. Best case scenario is you serve a notice and the tenant leaves.
If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about the process around tenancy law and evictions, what would it be?
That there would be more court staff and judges to deal with the claims. Buy-to-let now is 19%. It's overtaken social housing, which is 17%. There's, on average, I spoke to a major high street agent, and they're saying that there's 11 tenant applicants fighting for one property. Demand's so strong, because we have a housing crisis. Average first-time buyer's 39 years old. So as buy-to-let and landlords and managing agent, wherever, we're in a buoyant. But, rents are on the rise, and we are now generation rent. The government want generation ownership, but they've got a big battle to do that.
What's the biggest mistake you see investors making time and time again?
Investors or landlords, there's a difference.
There is. One's more hands-on, one's more hands-off. Well, let's just talk broadly. Whether someone invests in property, whether they consider themselves an investor or a landlord, what mistakes are you seeing that you think, if I could just correct this one thing to stop people doing it all the time, it would be this?
I would say that there's not enough diligence. It's great that we put shows on like this. People go around, they hear experts speak. I've been doing this for donkey's years. People get a lot of information. I wrote a book, and it's all about the information. Don't rush into investment. I think that people will wait to see what's going to happen with the referendum. No one likes uncertainty. People say to me, and I have it on my radio show, should I buy, should I whatever. If it's owner-occupier, then it's different, and it's a completely different purchase to an investor. But it's about getting the yields. The days of getting deals are really, really challenging. But one thing is for certain, rents are on the rise, and it's tough because, of course, I worry that with regard to the tax implications that have come in, with regard to the 3% stamp duty and the abolishment of tax relief, that's just going to get piled onto rents, and it's tough for tenants. Tenants also that aspire to own property in the shared ownership schemes and whatever, they will make a informed decision as to what they can afford. Do they want to live there, or do they want to live there, pay more rent? And the gap is widening.
You must have to deal with some fairly interesting characters in your line of work. You've got to have some kind of sympathy for tenants, but at what point do you lose your sympathy with them?
When I see they're taking the big, out of landlords, I fight very passionately for landlords, and I do a lot of press and PR. It's quite obvious. You got the biggest problem with landlords is naivety and time, and not having experts on their side. And before they know it, they're owed a fortune. Then we get instructed when there's 6, 7, 8 months rent arrears. And then they turn and say, "Can you collect the money?" And you say, "Well, what assets does the tenant? Do you know if they're still working? Oh, they left their job 8 months. And it's frustrating. And landlords will learn the hard way. Every landlord makes a mistake. Things happen during the term of a tenancy, and you have to make sure they learn by it. This is a long term, and we see landlords that are exiting, and that's actually why the government have brought in these tax implications, because they want that stock. They think that stock's going to go to owner-occupier, to first-time buyers, and we're yet to see. I think that the government have been, embarrassed with regard to home ownership. And they were the very words that Michael Portillo used on Tuesday at the ALA conference that I was at. And that's why they have brought in these changes, because they want first-time buyers to be on a level playing field when they're trying to get this stock. As to what stock comes up, whether it's family stock or whether it's first-time buyers, we don't know.
big thanks to Paul and the time he gave us at the show. He's a busy guy and he was running around everywhere. So it was really nice to meet him. It's nice for him to give the time to the podcast. We appreciate it. Thanks, Paul. But some really interesting insights as well, Rob. There are things you can do, and he touched on this, to avoid the problems in the first place. And I think that's the big lesson here. Prevention is better than cure. It's fantastic that services like Paul's exist with Landlord Action, and that's great. And if you get in trouble, you've got that peace of mind that there are people there that can help you. But actually, by doing the right things at the beginning, massively reduce the risk of those things going wrong. It still can happen, but actually, if you take some simple steps, a lot of those issues, a lot of those pain points can almost completely disappear. Not entirely, but vastly reduce the odds of it happening.
Yeah, exactly. And he said that the biggest mistake that he sees people making is not enough diligence. And I think he meant that in terms of the tenant that you take on and also the investment case as a whole. And it's not due to any shortage of information, but there's more information freely available than ever before. But it's just getting that information in front of the right people and also actually applying it, because it's one thing to actually know it on an intellectual level, but then it's quite another to make sure that you apply it. And if you have had a property that's been empty for a few weeks, not to just take the first tenant who comes along without doing the checks that you should do, or if you've got a bad feeling about it or whatever. But it was really interesting to hear his experiences from the front line, someone who's working on behalf of landlords, which isn't something you hear very often, someone taking the landlord side and actually seeing what goes on, what the story behind all this stuff, what happens when you actually have to physically knock on the door and throw people out. It's another world from us kind of sitting around safely behind our microphones, being hundreds of miles away often from the properties and just kind of playing around with our spreadsheets and on Rightmove. I've got a lot of respect for people who do that kind of thing.
So next up, we interviewed Janice Parker from Rita for Rent, our property accountant. So they help landlords, investors with their accounts. It's great that there are specialists out there who can look after people with tax issues, questions. So we thought it'd be really good to get her on the show because, as we mentioned, there's a few things going on tax-wise at the moment. So we started by asking her, what's causing the most pain amongst landlords right now?
Well, I think, the landlord definitely thinks that the government has got it in for them, and with the way they've changed legislation, that would clearly seem to be the case, because I think landlords are easy targets. They're a way for the government to raise money to reach the targets to pay off our national debt, and the general public doesn't really have that much sympathy for them. It's not like they're saying, oh, we'll take another 20 billion off our social fund, oh no, we'll raise money from the landlords, because nobody's going to rise up and say, oh, wait a minute, this isn't fair. And what they're concerned about now is, of course, this year what's come in. We've got the hike in the stamp duty charges for buying additional properties, and we've got the loss of the wear and tear allowance for furnished properties. Obviously, another concern is the change in the mortgage interest relief provisions, but that's not going to start hitting until next year. So the immediate pain, I think, at the moment is the stamp duty problem.
What do you feel the level of awareness is around all these changes? Because at some of the seminars today, you'll see like someone will put up a slide about the tax changes that are happening, and everyone kind of goes, oh, and starts scribbling down notes, whereas like we think that it's quite widely publicised and everyone's aware of it. But I doubt that that's the case.
I think it depends on the type of landlord you're focusing on. If you're talking about the professional landlord who actually runs a rental business as a business, they are very much aware of what's going on in relation to the tax changes. It's the landlord who thinks it's simply a good idea to have a rental property because they're looking at the return for their investment rather than actually running it as a business. And I think they tend to be less interested in what's going on out there that will affect their businesses.
We get asked a lot as a result of what we do, people coming to us and saying, should I incorporate, should I do this, should I do that? And we always try not to give advice because we don't know what we're talking about and say it depends, because it does depend. But what's the process that you go through when someone comes to you to get to a more helpful answer than it depends?
Well, clearly if somebody comes to us, they have to pay us for the advice that we give. And if you're asking me for the actual process, We simply ask them to tell us what it is they want advice on. We will tell them how much it will cost them, and we will give the appropriate advice. And yes, a lot of people are interested in incorporating, but what they have to consider is that there are serious upfront charges involved in that if they want to transfer existing properties into a company, and they really should take professional advice before thinking, oh yeah, that's a wonderful idea, I will just rush off and do that. No, please do not do that. Do take professional advice because you need it.
At what level do you feel an investor should be at before they start taking tax advice? Do you think people should do preparation before they even begin their journey? Or do you feel that people, only when they're at a certain level of portfolio, they should start considering tax? When does it have an impact?
I think right at the very start, because we deal with a lot of people who are currently registering with the Let Property campaign. A lot of these people didn't even consider the tax aspects of renting out of property, and they're now finding that they're having to pay back tax, interest and penalties. So my advice would be, even if you think you're confident enough to deal with your tax problems or your tax obligations on your own, at least pay for initial advice on what you need to be doing before going ahead and doing it, because otherwise you could find yourself in a lot of problems, and nobody wants that.
Can you give us a quick win? Is there anything that investors, reliefs for example, that people might not be aware of that exist? Because often, like you say, employing a good accountant will save you more money than it costs you, because they'll give you the confidence and the knowledge to claim for things. So can you give us a flavour?
A relief in respect of what? Income tax, capital gains tax?
Take your pick.
Well, one relief that a lot of investors aren't very much aware of is if they've been letting out a property that they used to live in, they can, and they sell it, for capital gains tax purposes, there are actually two reliefs that they can claim so that they do not pay tax on the full gain. One is the main residence relief, because you can get relief for the period that you occupied the property, and the other is called the lettings relief, which is an additional relief you can get when you've both owned and occupied the property and then let it out. Or it could be the other way around, actually. You could be letting out a property and then decide to move into it, and then you sell it on, because obviously the period where you let it out doesn't is subject to capital gains tax. So that's my one tip so far as capital gains tax is concerned.
So that was us talking to Janice Parker from Rita for Rent, and she made a point that I've heard several times recently, which is basically that when the public finances are struggling, landlords are pretty easy targets, because you can't just pick up your property and move off to another country, and no one's going to particularly have a lot of sympathy. No one's going to complain if you start taxing landlords more. So there is a bit of a grab going on. Another thing that I thought was really interesting was the distinction that she drew between professional landlords, kind of using air quotes for that because we might have another job as well, but people who really take a business-like attitude to it, and amateurs who not only don't know what's coming up, but possibly don't know what they're meant to have been doing for the last however many years and have been messing up their taxes for all this time.
It's no easy system, no, and the government's going out their way to make it harder and harder for us, not just to invest in property, but actually to just understand what they want us to do. And I think we could have done a 10-hour podcast on tax and we'd still have questions coming. That's the challenge with tax, because there's no stock answer for anyone. You know, it's not everyone should do this or everyone should do that. At the summits, we get asked a lot about tax. And although we're not tax experts, we'll do our best to help people. But what we find is there's no answer. You know, there's no answer that we can repeat time and time again. And that's why we've done so many podcasts, and we'll link to them in the show notes. And that's why we've done the course and this interview as well, and probably will do more on this subject, because it's such a vast topic, and because there's so many variables, it's stuff that you just have to get your head round and have to educate yourself on, because if you don't, it could be costing you a lot of money. So we're really grateful to Janice for coming on, for giving us some insight and a bit more information on exactly what's happening right now. Okay, Rob, So, of course, we've got another podcast next week. Which we'll talk about shortly, and we've got our resource of the week. But before we do that, we have to applaud one final person on this podcast, and it's our lovely reviewer.
Yeah, we do love these iTunes reviews. If you haven't put yours in yet, please do. We love to read them out. Rob, what is being said this week?
This week is from Awabby, and Awabby has given us 5 stars kindly. And Awabby says, stumbled across the property podcast by reading 100 property investment tips a couple of months ago. Thought the content of the book was informative and straight to the point, so I tried the podcast out. Currently just finishing listening to my podcast, number 24, and I'm so impressed how you applied the inflation concept to investment as a whole in such a refreshing way. Well done, Rob and Rob. Well, thank you, Awabby. Really appreciate it. Glad you enjoyed the book, and glad you've started right at the beginning of the podcast, as you've probably realised now, there's a fair few. The inflation one, Rob, though, even though it was one of the earliest ones, we still get great feedback about that one.
We do. It's possibly one that we should revisit or highlight in some way, because it is one of those really important concepts that might get missed because it is now way back in the mist of time when we did it. But it is so important and also quite reassuring as well, I think.
It is. We won't give you another podcast on that subject now. We'll link to it in the show notes, which this week you can find at thepropertyhub.net/tenants and taxes.
So before we leave you, as always, we've got a resource of the week. And this week's resource is a bit of an unusual one, but this is one that we were talking about at the summit the other week, actually. Somebody else suggested this. I can't remember where I picked it up from. Rob, I think you were doing it before me, but this is a tip that could have saved people probably about 5 to 7 minutes while listening to this podcast and could save them a lot more time in the future.
Absolutely. Why not get through our podcasts quicker? So the point here is use this hack to consume more of your audio content. What are we talking about? Well, speeding up the pace you listen to podcasts or audiobooks or even videos now on YouTube. So what do you do? Well, on your app, whatever app you're using, you'll be given the options to listen to different speeds. So it'll be set at default to normal, 1 speed. But you can, on many apps, change it to 1.25, 1.5, 2 times, and even 3 times. I tend to operate on a 1.25 and 1.5 speeds. I'll start on 1.25, and it's very easy to understand even the fastest talkers at that pace. And then, once I'm used to it, I'll move up to 1.5. Now, it will take a minute or two for you to adjust. You may think, I can't consume this. It's far too fast. I'm not taking it in. Let your ears and brain get used to it, and you'll be shocked. Before you know it, it'll just sound like normal pace to you. And then you're suddenly going through podcasts, videos, and anything else you listen to audio-wise a lot quicker, which means you can fit more in. YouTube have rolled this out in the last couple of years, and it's a great feature. So TED Talks, things like that, if you like to consume that sort of content, there's a lot out there. This allows you to go through it at a much faster pace. And trust me, some of the fastest talkers out there, you can still consume at 1.25 speed. So it's a way of getting even more audio goodness into your life each week.
Yep, it's something that works out well for me. I tend to do it at 1.25 as well, and then occasionally up it from there. All we need now is something that allow us to do meetings at 1.5 times speed. That's what I could really do with. So maybe, I don't know if that's something that YouTube can help us out with, but if anyone can make this happen, please do.
Okay, so next week we're back with another interview for a much bigger topic. Auctions. We were lucky enough to interview another Rob, just to make life really easy or exceptionally confusing. And he works for an auction house. So we quizzed him about auctions, what you should do, what are the common mistakes, what are the ways to take advantage of auctions. And I think it'll make for a really interesting episode. In fact, we were talking at the recent summit that auctions right now could be a place of opportunity. We'll talk more about that next week because we've said for a long time that auctions haven't been a place to consider. But right now, what's happening in the market, auctions could be a place to consider. But don't run out to your auction house and start sticking your hand up just yet. Come back next week and we'll give you the lowdown, all the information you need so you can be successful at auctions.
Yep, I'm really looking forward to that episode. So that's going to be next Thursday. We've, of course, got Ask Rob and Rob coming up next Tuesday. And in the meantime, go out and get yourself booked onto next month's meetups. They're already open for registrations. It's completely free. There's more than 30 of them around the country. Make sure you get out there and do that. If you haven't been to a meetup before, resolve to make June your first time. For now, though, thank you for listening. Thank you very much to our guests this week, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to The Property Podcast. For show notes, all our past episodes, and to leave a review, go to thepropertyhub.net/podcast.